The Annulus. Journey into the unknown. Through the vortex. Y. Sengyang. Copyright at 2020 Y. Sengyang. All rights reserved. The characters and events portrayed in this book are fictitious. Any similarity to real persons, living or dead, is coincidental and not intended by the author. No part of this book may be reproduced, or stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without express written permission of the publisher. Chapter 15. Journey to Heliu. The habitat traversed the Annulus through the vortex and into a wormhole created by the light clouds. The habitat was trailing behind the two defender units in one single space-time bubble. It was being drawn inexorably through the vortex and upon entering the wormhole with no control from the helm of the habitat. All communications and tracking by the Chernobyl control room was lost within a few minutes with the habitat entrance into the Annulus. But up to the time telemetry was received, life signs of the piglet in the lead defender continued to be displayed: green, all healthy or positive readings. So were the biosigns of all the human occupants of the two compartments of the habitat. And who had the wisdom to take an extra large dose of air sickness pills in preparation for a cramped journey inside an equipment console, managed a few extra moments of lucidity to keep her eyes on the video screens displaying views from the cameras mounted on front and rear corners of the habitat showing its transit through the wormhole. Everything was bathed in a glow of blue energy, and instantly the images from the forward camera showed the habitat in transit through the wormhole, and a glowing aura of red light lit up everything in the path of the advancing habitat. The rear camera captured a glimpse of the rooftop of the sarcophagus over turbine house, and that was tinged in blue before everything flickered to static as the habitat crossed over the event horizon. And then blacked out and slumped back into her seat. Within this volutive energy created by the light cloud entities, the habitat was protected in a temporal anomaly bubble in the space-time continuum. The dome over the turbine house at Chernobyl on Earth extended into the Annulus and onwards through the wormhole towards its destination at the other end. On their destination, the planet Heliu. Colonel Owens was the first to awake. Captain Evans and Sergeant Manning, are you all right? They became conscious and answered, yes sir, we are okay. Colonel Owens looked at the countdown indicator, and it showed that the framework around the habitat had been detached by automatic activation of the explosive bolts. Captain Evans, Colonel, from our trip recorder, we have spent more than 40 minutes in transit from the time we rolled into the turbine house until we woke up. Colonel Owens, Captain, set up communications link with HQ, report on our position. At this moment, what is our position? Colonel Owens looked puzzled as he stared at the reading or lack of readings on the satellite positioning system location device. He tapped it with his fingers, but still the readout was showing a series of zeros. Colonel Owens, Captain Evans, this new SPS which bounces signals from Earth satellites to newly launched satellites orbiting Mars and Jupiter should track our position anywhere within the solar system. But it seems to be malfunctioning, or maybe. At that moment, the video-audio link with the rear compartment came alive and Ken Harding's voice could be heard on the system. Ken, hello everyone in the forward compartment. Is everyone all right? Colonel Owens looked at the biosigns monitoring panel and saw that all the rear compartment occupants were monitored as present. Everyone seems fine except the sensors picked up an additional person unaccounted for. In the rear compartment, Colonel Owens' voice came on over the intercom. Is everyone all right back there? And who is the stowaway? Let me guess, Miss Waterston. Ken, yes Colonel, we are all awake now, and it is. And who is with us? And Waterston, yes Colonel, I am all right, but where are we? Professor Anatoly, DA. I am a bit shaken, but nothing broken. Ron Carter nodded his head in agreement, and Alistair Mackenzie raised his hand and gave a weak thumbs up. Colonel Owens, Professor Anatoly and Dr. Harding, look at your instruments. The satellite positioning system cannot place our location. It looks like the habitat may have left the solar system to somewhere. Just check your trip recorder reading. It is the one on the panel in front of where Professor Anatoly's seat is. Ken Harding and Professor Anatoly focused their view on the duplicate trip recorder in the auxiliary control room. It showed 40 minutes have elapsed since this journey started. And, Ken, just as I was about to pass out, I noticed the camera views forward and rear of the habitat. I distinctly saw the front view showing a reddish tone in color in contrast to the rear camera which was showing a bluish tone. Harding, and that would have been the Doppler shift effect on the viewpoint of the habitat relative to objects forward of us that we are approaching at an extremely high velocity. This would take on a red color shift in contrast to the rear view of items receding from the habitat at the same high velocity. Those rear objects will take on a blue color shift. Factor in our trip recorder showing a lapse of 40 minutes, I would venture a guess that we have traveled through some sort of space-time discontinuity to our present destination, a great distance from our starting point. Ron, so is Jake here where we are? Is this place on a different planet near Earth? Professor Anatoly, no, if the habitat did transit through the vortex, which could be some sort of space-time anomaly, then we may be hundreds of millions of kilometers from Earth, on a different star system even. Ken, Prof, if you are right, and the habitat did transit some sort of wormhole or Einstein-Rosenberg bridge, then we may even be in different space-time dimension. Captain Evans cut off the communications link with the auxiliary control room. Colonel, see our main sensor readings. It is now showing a steady reading of our position. We cannot place our new location, but it is not Chernobyl anymore. Colonel Owen, Evans put the forward camera views on the monitors in the auxiliary control room. Attention there in the auxiliary control, look at the camera views. See the shimmering light in front of the habitat? We need to find out what we are in. Give me some ideas on our location. Ken and Anatoly looked at the images. Anatoly's voice came over the communications link. Colonel, we see the same simmering light at the rear of the habitat also, same as what the front monitors are showing. Sergeant Manning, Captain Evans, Colonel Sir, I have tried the engines, they seem to work but the wheels are spinning and rotating but somehow we are not moving forward nor backward. Colonel Owen, let's check where we are. He activated the electronic environmental sensors to detect the environment outside of the habitat. The multi-frequency sensors in the periscopic system scanned the surroundings of the habitat, analyzed the incoming data, and displayed it in multimodal form. Captain Evans compared the results against the database of information collected from the various incidents on Earth. Captain Evans, Colonel, the data shares certain similarities to what we collected at Sun Valley and Diablo Canyon. Shall I copy the data and the analysis on the common data link with the auxiliary control room? Colonel gave a nod to Captain Evans' request. He spoke on the intercom. Professor Anatoly, Dr. Harding, the habitat is in fine shape, but we are unable to move forward or backward anywhere. So, I am sending you the data we collected from the environmental sensors and the comparative analysis we did with the data we collected at Sun Valley and Diablo Canyon. See for yourself and tell me what your conclusions are. Ken, the readings displayed are like those we took of the dome. I think we are inside one of those domes. And, you mean our vehicle is inside one of these blue domes and we are going nowhere? Professor Anatoly, there are some differences in the time signature and return period of the carrier signal frequency. This dome energy seems to be of local origin from sources near this location. The similar data I received from Professor Brown for Sun Valley and Diablo Canyon shows that it was transmitted to Earth on some carrier frequency and amplified to form the dome. Ron, if we got through the Annulus and vortex and traveled to this location, then it stands to reason that Jake got through alive and well. I want to try to activate Jake's proximity alarm to see if there is any response. Colonel Owens, Ron, no, not yet. We cannot signal our presence until we know what we are up against out there. So, no transmissions until we can understand our situation better. Clear. Captain Evans muted the intercom and said to Colonel Owens, Sir, do I have your permission to energize our weapon systems? Colonel Owens, just a test shot with our ranging laser sensor at the dome. We need to know what is out there before we venture out of the habitat. Captain Evans, Sergeant Manning, power up the lasers. Colonel Owens, attention all crew of the habitat, we are going to test fire our laser at the dome. We have no idea what the reactions will be. So, fasten yourself into your seat harness and brace yourself. Master Sergeant Manning, Captain, Colonel, The lasers are ready, sir. Colonel Owens, fire the forward laser straight ahead. Chapter 16. Unwelcome guests. Sensors in the dimensional gate system had detected the radioactive emissions from the spent nuclear fuel. These comprised of the spent fuel pods and the framework now detached from the habitat. The dimensional gate program sent these separately to another shielded docking bay while the habitat was sent to the main docking bay. For precautions, a force field was projected to contain the entire habitat. The Supreme Council, alerted on the arrival of this unknown vehicle, sent Commander Zachary with a contingent of the High Temple security guards to augment the security forces already on duty in the main docking bay. They manned all areas in the main docking bay and covered the habitat with their weapons. Then, without warning, the laser beam from the habitat hit the dome and ricocheted off the force field, forming the dome, producing multiple reflections and scattered beams lighting up the entire dome. The sensors on the control station consoles lit up like a Christmas tree. Everyone in the loading bay scrambled for cover with weapons primed for a firefight. Zuriel, desperate to prevent the outbreak of an intergalactic skirmish, checked his console instruments that registered the energy signature of the emission from the habitat. In an instant, he could determine that there was insufficient energy to do any damage except maybe to blind someone temporarily if the beam had impacted someone's eyes. He shouted out, "Hold it, everyone! It is just a ranging light emission of coherent frequency with extremely low energy signature. It is not a weapon discharge, and our sensors indicate there may be life forms inside this structure." "Zachary, what are you saying? So we are not under fire from those inside this vehicle?" "Zuriel, I say again, the shielding of this vehicle is special, and our sensors cannot penetrate their shell. I cannot tell anything besides detection of life forms inside, and the light emission at the shield is of low strength which did not penetrate the shield." "Zachary, so you are telling me we cannot probe inside their vehicle?" "Zuriel, yes, that is correct. So, I am going to open a small aperture in the shield and transmit a holographic image for their vehicle sensors to pick up. That may assure them of the habitability of our environment to their life forms and our good intentions." "Zachary, I need the High Priest Council permission to allow you to do that." "Zuriel, no, I do not need your permission to do that. It is only a small aperture where we can transmit our signal to their vehicle. Anything they may want to send out will be blocked. I suspect once they sense that we have made this goodwill gesture, they will feel more relaxed in their follow-on actions." Inside the habitat, Captain Evans shut down the laser rangefinder sensor and the console began to print out the data sampled. A signal strength indication symbol lit up on the instrument console. "Captain Evans, Colonel, our sensor is picking up a signal of unknown origin. I think I can modulate the signal and display it on our screens." "Shall I, sir?" "Colonel Owens, do it, Evans." Captain Evans spoke on the intercom. "Can everyone please switch to channel 2 on the camera intercom system? The image is being displayed on that channel." As they watch, it was a series of still images that did not seem to be in focus. They could make no sense of what they were watching. "And Waterston, hey, I have seen this before when we were experimenting with multiple cameras to shoot live programs for 3D TV transmissions. I think this is some sort of 3D image. Do you have a multiplex multi-channel signal processor? I am sure you technical guys can use it to handle the signal." Captain Evans adjusted the image using the equipment and adjusted it for 3D image processing. Lo and behold, the images began to increase in image solidity. And took over the controls using the equipment at the auxiliary control room and operated the joystick to rotate images, combine them, and the screen picture stabilized into solid 3D images. What they saw was like a PowerPoint of 3D models of the oxygen and nitrogen molecules, instantly recognizable as breathable air. Floating equations floated in mid-air to show gravity, atmospheric gas composition, radiation-free readings, etc. Ken and Professor Anatoly had a quick review of the readings, and Ken called Colonel Owens. "Colonel, we think the message is to assure us of the habitability of the outside environment." "Professor Anatoly, I do not make assumptions based on what we have received. Colonel, we need to take samples of our environmental conditions. Captain Evans, Colonel, what we can do is to send our articulated arm with the environmental sensors to check the habitability of the surroundings outside the dome. Whoever sent us those 3D images wants to assure us of the safety of the environment out there, but it may be a trap, so we must not take chances. Colonel Owens, all right, but let us be careful. At least now we know we are not floating in space but in some habitable environment. We still need to know what is outside. Master Sergeant Manning, deploy the articulated robot arm. Ron, you back there in the auxiliary control room, stand by for readings. Captain Evans operated the instrumented sensor mounted on the articulated arm and was able to home in on the aperture in the shield that was opened by Zuriel. The arm emerged on the other side of the dome shield. Ron ran the diagnostic programs of the environment console to analyze data sample of the environment on the outside of the shield. Checks on gravitational pull, pressure, atmospheric content, radioactivity, known toxins and known bacteria. Within a few minutes, the readings were all positive, confirming the habitability of the external environment beyond the shield. Colonel Owens announced over the intercom, all the tests are showing good results. The outside of the dome is pretty much like Earth but has a slightly lower gravity. Air is breathable and is of lower pressure, about what you would get up in the mountains. But before we do anything, we need to establish communications link with control. So, get suited up in the biohazard hard suits just in case and wait for my orders. Captain Evans, but Colonel, I have been working on every channel since coming to, and we have no communications link with control. Every channel or wavelength is dead. So, satellite communications, phone, radio, nothing is working. Colonel Owens, listen everyone, we have tried to communicate with command through all channels, but nothing works. Captain Evans, the equipment is transmitting, and the signals are going out, but we do not seem to be getting a return signal. Either command base is gone, or it is not returning the signal. Colonel Owens looked at Captain Evans, we have our orders, and our objective is to reckon this side of the portal and communicate with the beings here to reason with them to stop their mass mining. Even if we cannot communicate with command, this objective stands. Colonel Owens got back on the intercom, everyone listen up, Team A comprising of Professor Anatoly and Dr. Harding will accompany myself and Master Sergeant Joe Manning as the advance recon party once so that we can figure out our status. We will explore the outside of the dome and try to establish contact with any inhabitants of this location. All the crew of the habitat chosen as Team A suited up in their hazmat suits. Dr. Harding and Professor Anatoly opened the airlock and crossed the tunnel between the auxiliary control room and joined Colonel Owens and Master Sergeant Manning in the control compartment of the habitat. The entire team entered the airlock for exiting the habitat and started the countdown sequence for the extravehicular expedition. The air was evacuated from the airlock chamber, after which they operated and opened the hatch to exit the habitat. As the team assembled outside the habitat, they could see the blue glow of the dome shield covering the entire habitat. As Colonel Owens looked at the handheld directional finder to locate his bearings, a small globule of light entered through the opening in the dome shield where the articulated arm had gone through. The light began to grow larger and within a few seconds, a doorway began to open. Ken, what is that? A gateway? What do we do now? Colonel Owen, we must go through it. We do not come all the way just to stay cooped up here. My instruments show that the environmental conditions are stable and benign. But just to be safe, hazmat suits and environmental systems stay on. Captain Evans, communications check. Team A, Colonel Owens, check. Sergeant Manning, check. Professor Anatoly, check. Dr. Harding, check. Ron, call Team A on his communications link. Team A from the instruments inside the control room. All environmental on either side of the opening is A-OK. Colonel Owens, Team A, let us move out. Sergeant Manning and I will be armed with both submachine guns and high-energy tasers. Zuriel and his team of scientists grouped around the control terminal and monitored the live feed of the emergence of the team of humans from the habitat and their reaction to the doorway through the dome shield. Zachary spoke to his security detail, stay alert in case of any hostile intent from the visitors. Zuriel, who was also watching the images of the visitors emerging from inside the habitat, spoke to his assistant Zoe on his personal communications channel. Zoe, go out there with Zachary and his security forces and do not let them harm the visitors and start an interplanetary war. Zachary signaled to his men to load and arm their energy weapons. Zoe felt that it was imperative that he convince Zachary not to start a skirmish. He walked over to Zachary and put a hand on his shoulder, but before he could speak, Zachary spoke first. Zachary, Zoe, do not start, I have my orders. I do not like the look of those handheld items these visitors have, those must be weapons. My security personnel will try to disarm them, but if they show any defiance or aggressive intentions, my personnel have their orders to fire their weapons. Zoe signaled to Zuriel to speak to Zachary on his personal communications unit to appeal to him. Zuriel, Zachary, listen, I understand you do not wish to take any chances. But I have instructed my technicians to activate the mass transfer gateway to filter and extract any metallic objects as they cross through the shield to enter the loading bay. So, they will be disarmed. No firing, please. Zachary had agreed, but scan them for hidden weapons in addition to those handheld weapons we see in their possession. Zuriel, all right, but I ask you then to instruct the security team not to take any hasty actions. Zachary, only if these visitors do not take any aggressive actions, otherwise they will be dealt with. Master Sergeant Joe Manning poked his head out of the doorway in the dome shield to check. Sergeant Manning, Colonel, all I can see is tunnel of light or energy. Colonel Owens gave a signal, and Team A ventured through the doorway with Sergeant Manning as the rear guard. Up ahead was what seemed to be a tunnel of energy. A doorway to exit the dome shield had opened and the Team A walked along the tunnel in anticipation of the unknown that they will soon meet. As they reached the end of the tunnel, there seemed to be a shimmering haze and static buzz of higher intensity energy. Colonel Owens signaled Master Manning and they both raised their weapons in anticipation. As they stepped through the shimmering haze, they felt jolts of energy pulsing through their bodies. Before their own eyes, their weapons evaporated away just as the light clouds made the scrap metal cars disappear in Mexico and California. Sergeant Manning, what the just happened? Colonel Owens called the habitat. Captain Evans, we are retreating back to the habitat. Arm our lasers. Ken Harding, Colonel, let us not do anything rash. They took the weapons off our hands, that is all. If they had wanted to harm us, I think we will have been vaporized or something equally horrible. Professor Anatoly, according to my instruments, we have walked through an energy field of a similar frequency band as the dome. The frequency is very narrow bandwidth. It may have finely tuned for metal extraction or transfer, weapons for example. That is why all of us are still alive, but your weapons have been taken. Colonel Owens thought for a moment and then called the habitat again. Captain Evans, cancel the last order. We are proceeding. Colonel Owens gingerly stepped through the energy portal minus his weapons and the rest of the Team A followed carefully. As they stepped through, they realized that they had stepped out into another confined volume of space defined by blue shimmering energy surfaces just like the dome. They were prisoners in a force field enclosure. The tunnel aperture closed behind them. Sergeant Manning tried to push his hand through the aperture to try to keep the doorway open but was repelled. As they looked out beyond the force field wall, they could see a large dark smooth window-like panel at one end of the large room they found themselves in. Ken turned his head back and looked for the habitat, but all they could see was the large room they were in. Colonel Owens tried to call Captain Evans on the radio, but all communication seemed to be dead. Master Sergeant Manning spotted a contraption of nozzles extending down towards them. Sir, that thing is coming down at us. Clouds of vapor smelling of disinfectant came streaming down from the contraption at them, and a ring of lights of changing color ran up and down over the entire containment energy cell. Ken felt a tingling sensation on his skin and looked at Professor Anatoly through the helmet visor of the hazmat suit. I think we have just been sanitized and sterilized. And they managed to do it right through our hazmat suits. Professor Anatoly, standard procedure for preventing contamination by allergens, germs, and other non-native life forms from entering a habitable environment, but far superior technology to what we have on Earth. Colonel Owens, so they are going to study us like some lab rats or guinea pigs. Ken Harding looked out of the energized containment cage and pointed at the large window at the other end of the room. It had turned transparent, and they could look beyond its surface. There were humanoid-looking beings on the other side of the window. If we are the lab rats, those must be the scientists.